What happens when a fighter jet built for icy back roads and fast ambushes suddenly becomes the nightmare of a much bigger air force? What if the real reason for panic in Moscow is not the plane itself, but the safe sky Russia may be about to lose? If you enjoy sharp military breakdowns in plain English, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with the one friend who always wants the deeper story before everyone else. For a long time, Russia enjoyed a brutal kind of comfort above the battlefield. Its strike aircraft could rise, release guided bombs from a distance, and turn away before many Ukrainian defenses could touch them. That advantage was not just about speed, it was about confidence. Russian crews could plan missions with the feeling that the most dangerous part of the trip might never come. And when one side begins to feel safe in war, that side becomes more aggressive, more efficient, and more willing to repeat the same attack again and again. That is why the talk around the JS-39 Gripen matters so much. Not because it is the biggest fighter in Europe, not because it is the most famous, and not because a few jets suddenly end a war. The reason is more dangerous than that. The Gripen attacks a weakness in the Russian method itself. It goes after the habit Russia built in the air. It goes after the rhythm. It goes after the assumption that strike aircraft can keep operating with low risk while ground troops and cities below absorb the damage. And that is where the fear begins, because the Gripen was not designed for comfort. It was designed for survival. Sweden built it with one dark idea in mind. If a stronger enemy smashes the main air bases first, the Air Force must still fight. That means a jet that can land on roads, launch from short stretches of pavement, refuel quickly, rearm quickly, and disappear before the next missile arrives. It means a fighter that does not need a giant exposed base to remain useful. It means a system made for a nation that expects to be hunted. Now put that idea into Ukraine. Suddenly, the conversation changes from how many jets are delivered to how hard they are to kill. That is a massive difference. Many aircraft can look impressive in brochures and air shows. War does not care about brochures. War asks much uglier questions. Can this jet fly after the runway is cratered? Can the crew service it with limited tools? Can it hide? Can it return fast enough to matter tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that? Can it keep working when everything around it is damaged, rushed, and under threat? The Gripen was built to answer yes to questions that would make many other air forces very uncomfortable. That is why this story is bigger than a weapons transfer. It is about the possible end of Russian air impunity in parts of the war. For years, one of Moscow's most useful tools has been the standoff strike. Aircraft stay back, launch from safer distances, and let glide bombs do the rest. That method creates pressure on trenches, logistics hubs, command posts, and towns far from the front line. It destroys morale because troops know an attack may come from above even when they cannot reach the aircraft that launched it. It is a cruel equation. The side that cannot touch the bomber is forced to endure the bomb. Now imagine that equation beginning to crack. Imagine Russian pilots knowing that the launch window itself may turn into a kill zone. Imagine planners in rear command having to ask a new question before every sortie. What if the aircraft does not come back? What if a plane that seemed safe 1 month ago is suddenly visible, trackable, and vulnerable from farther away than expected? What if the cost of every strike rises? What if escort needs grow? What if routes must change? What if launch points move farther back? What if response time slows? What if fear enters the cockpit? That is how air power weakens. Not always in one dramatic explosion. Sometimes it weakens because the pilot starts doing math differently. And this is exactly where the Gripen becomes terrifying. The first reason is simple: mobility. The Gripen does not depend on luxury. It was shaped around dispersed operations. In plain English, that means it can work from places that do not look like normal air bases. A straight piece of road, a hidden strip, a temporary site supported by a small team. In a war where fixed infrastructure is always being watched, targeted, or damaged, that is gold. Russia has spent enormous energy trying to hit Ukrainian runways, depots, and known operating sites. If the aircraft can move in ways that are hard to predict, the strike problem gets worse for Russia immediately. Instead of hunting one or two major airfields, you may have to worry about a network of short-term operating points. Instead of planning around a visible target, You plan around uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison in war. It burns missiles. It wastes reconnaissance. It creates delays. It forces commanders to hit more locations to achieve less effect. The second reason is turnaround time. The Gripen was built so ground crews can get it ready fast. That matters more than many people realize. A fighter is not dangerous because it exists on paper. It is dangerous because it can fly, land, reload, and fly again before the enemy can breathe. Fast turnaround means more sorties. More sorties mean more chances to intercept, patrol, threaten, and disrupt. If a jet can return to action quickly with a smaller support footprint, it becomes a persistent problem, not a rare appearance. And persistence changes psychology. A Russian pilot may accept the risk of encountering one patrol once in a while, but a constant patrol pattern is different. It reshapes the sky. It makes timing harder. It increases fatigue. It forces caution. It makes every mission feel more watched. The third reason is cost efficiency. The Gripen has long been praised for being cheaper to operate than many heavier Western fighters. In a long war, this matters more than glamour. Ukraine does not need a jet that looks powerful for 1 week. It needs an air combat system that can survive month after month without becoming a maintenance black hole. A lower operating cost does not make headlines like a stealth coating or giant engine, but war is won by sustained output, not by flashy features alone. And then we reach the fourth reason, the one that really makes strategists sit upright, the missile, specifically the Meteor. This is where panic begins to sound less like a headline and more like a planning memo. The Meteor is dangerous because it is built for long-range air combat with strong energy in the final part of the attack. Many older missiles sprint early, burn hard, and then spend the rest of the flight losing speed. That gives the target a chance. A fast aircraft can maneuver, drag the missile out, and try to survive the last seconds. The Meteor is feared because it keeps more fight deeper into the engagement. It was designed to stay lethal farther out, making escape much harder once the target is inside the wrong envelope. In simple terms, it does not just reach far. Now think about who should worry most. Not just enemy fighters in a classic dogfight. The real stress falls on aircraft that rely on distance and timing to deliver weapons, especially strike aircraft that need a predictable launch routine. If those aircraft can be threatened earlier, the entire strike chain becomes unstable. A bomber or strike jet forced to launch sooner, turn earlier, fly lower, or accept escort complications may still attack, but less comfortably and sometimes less effectively. That is the hidden power of the Gripen plus Meteor combination. It can change behavior before it changes maps, and behavior is everything in a war of attrition. If Russian strike crews must release from worse positions, some attacks become less accurate. If they need more protection, fewer aircraft may be available for other tasks. If they have to operate farther back, the timing of support for ground assaults changes. If they must spend more time avoiding threats, the pressure on Ukrainian defenders can ease, even if only in some sectors at first. Those small shifts add up. A few seconds, a few kilometers, a few extra escorts, a few delayed launches. In war, that can mean lives. That is why people who understand air warfare do not only ask, how many jets? They also ask, what kind of fear do these jets create? What kind of planning do they break? What habit do they punish? And the answer here is clear. The Gripen punishes predictability. If this breakdown is helping you see the story beyond the headline, support the channel in a different way today. Tap subscribe, press like, and send this video to someone who thinks military power is only about who has the most metal. But let's slow down for a moment, because this is where a lot of channels get lazy. They tell you a new weapon arrives, then they act like victory is scheduled for next Tuesday. Real war is not like that. A squadron of Gripens would matter, but it would not be magic. Even a very smart fighter cannot erase every problem in the sky. It still needs pilots trained on the platform. It still needs maintenance discipline. It still needs fuel, munitions, secure communications, mission planning, radar support, and protection on the ground. And above all, it needs to fit into a larger network. This part matters because modern air combat is not just machine versus machine. It is network versus network. A missile with great range still needs target information. A fighter needs awareness. Ground radar, airborne sensors, command links, electronic support, and data sharing all matter. If that web is strong, the Gripen becomes far more dangerous. If that web is damaged, jammed, or broken, even a good jet becomes less effective. So the real question is not simply whether the Gripen is good. It is. The deeper question is whether Ukraine can integrate it into a system that survives constant Russian pressure. If the answer is yes, then Moscow has a serious problem. If the answer is only partly yes, then the Gripen still helps, but the effect is smaller and more local. Even then, local effects can be huge. Think about one defended corridor, one sector where Russian aircraft suddenly face a much higher chance of interception, one zone where launch patterns become dangerous, one area where bomb delivery becomes more hesitant, one city where pressure from the air drops just enough for logistics to recover, one front line where soldiers finally spend fewer hours waiting for guided bombs they cannot answer. War is not only decided by giant arrows on a map, sometimes it turns on a few sectors where the old rules stop working. That is where the Gripen could become more than a fighter. It could become a confidence weapon for the side defending below. And confidence matters on the ground as much as in the sky. A trench under constant standoff bombing is not just a military position, it is a mental prison. Men sit there knowing the aircraft may be out of reach, the bomb may already be coming, and the response options may be limited. Every successful interception changes that feeling. Every denied strike tells soldiers something powerful. The enemy is not untouchable. That message travels fast. The same happens on the Russian side. Pilots talk, crews compare experiences, commanders update risk tables, intelligence officers reassess routes. The legend of safety begins to crack. That is often how panic really starts in military institutions, not with public screaming, with quiet paperwork, with meetings that get longer, with briefings that feel heavier, with planners asking for more support, more escort, more suppression, more caution. Now add one more piece that makes the Gripen especially relevant. It was born from the logic of a smaller country facing a stronger neighbor. That mindset matters. Sweden did not design the jet for imperial expedition comfort. It designed it for a harsh scenario where survival, flexibility, and speed matter more than prestige. In that sense, the Gripen matches Ukraine's situation far better than people realize. Ukraine is fighting under missile threat, drone threat, and infrastructure threat. It cannot always count on perfect runways, safe rear bases, or long maintenance windows. It needs practicality. It needs a fighter that respects the ugliness of real war. This is also why the Gripen creates a strange kind of strategic pressure. It is not only a weapon, it is a statement that the battlefield can be reorganized around resilience instead of luxury. That is a dangerous lesson for Russia, because Russia has relied heavily on punishing fixed infrastructure. If air power can survive in a more scattered form, then destroying a few airfields no longer solves the same problem. Of course, Moscow would not sit still. Russia has options. It can intensify missile strikes on suspected operating zones. It can use drones to hunt road-based activity. It can lean harder on electronic warfare. It can try to destroy support vehicles, fuel points, and radar nodes. It can push its strike aircraft to adapt with escorts, route changes, and heavier standoff tactics. It can try to saturate defenses and force the defenders to reveal their positions. In other words, the arrival of a new threat does not freeze the enemy. It starts a new round of adaptation. And that is exactly why the word panic needs to be understood properly. Panic here does not mean Russia suddenly loses all air power. It means Russian planners may face a weapon system that attacks one of their most valuable wartime advantages at the exact moment they have grown used to using it. It means they may need to spend more resources to achieve the same result. It means they may be forced to operate with more risk and less comfort. And in a long war, comfort is not a small thing. Comfort becomes a hidden source of strength. Take that away, and everything becomes more expensive. More aircraft needed for escort. More fuel burned on changed routes. More caution in mission planning. More delay between launch windows. More wear on crews. More pressure on maintenance. More uncertainty in command. And all of that comes before we even talk about aircraft losses, which are not only military losses but political ones. Every lost strike jet is a message. Every lost crew is a shock. Every failed sortie is a crack in the image of control. Now let's go even deeper, because the biggest impact of the Gripen may not be what it shoots down. It may be what it keeps away. Deterrence in the air is often invisible. If a Russian aircraft turns back, launches from a worse point, avoids a corridor, or delays a mission because the risk profile changed, there may be no dramatic video clip for social media, but the effect is real. No bomb dropped is a result. A mission never launched is a result. A commander forced to cancel a plan because the sky is no longer easy is a result. This matters because wars are full of events we never see. We see explosions. We do not see the attack package that was denied. We see damaged buildings. We do not see the bomb run that never happened because the threat level was too high. A capable interceptor with a long reach can shape war through absence as much as through destruction. That is one reason small numbers can still matter. 16 jets do not erase a much larger Russian inventory, but 16 jets, if used intelligently, can create defended problems in key areas. They can force Russia to respect certain zones. They can compel adjustment. They can break the feeling that the sky belongs to one side by default. And once that feeling breaks, the strategic consequences spread. Think about Ukrainian commanders planning ground movement. If they gain even temporary relief from certain kinds of air attack, they can move supplies differently. Repair teams can work with less interruption. Reserve forces can shift more safely. Air defense systems can breathe. Field fortifications can improve. Medical evacuation becomes less deadly. Morale changes. Again, not magic, not instant victory, but meaningful relief in a war where relief itself is a form of power. Now here comes the uncomfortable truth many people ignore. None of this works if the whole support chain is weak. The Gripen can launch from roads, but roads alone are not enough. You need discipline, concealment, trained crews, rapid logistics, secure command, missile stocks, pilot survival plans, dispersed maintenance, decoys, camouflage, redundancy. The plane gives you the possibility. It does not automatically deliver the outcome. That is why the smartest way to see the Gripen is not as a superhero, but as a multiplier. If Ukraine builds the support system around it well, the effect could be sharp and painful for Russia. If not, the aircraft still helps, but below its full potential. And yet, even that possibility is enough to create anxiety in Moscow, because military institutions fear not only what is happening now, they fear what may soon become possible. If the Gripen enters the war with proper support, it signals a future in which Ukraine can challenge Russian strike patterns more intelligently and more sustainably. It signals a future in which road-based dispersal, long-range interception, and fast rearm cycles create a more stubborn air defense layer. It signals that Russian pilots may no longer enjoy the same safe routines. It signals that some of the old math is expiring. That is what triggers the deepest kind of alarm, not noise, obsolescence. If you have stayed with me this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Drop a like, subscribe for the next breakdown, and share this with the person who loves the details that most headlines skip. Now let's talk about scale, because this is where smart analysis separates itself from wishful thinking. A few advanced fighters can change conditions. They cannot single-handedly dominate a giant war zone unless everything else supports them. Russia still has numbers, layered air defense, electronic warfare, and its own ability to adapt. It can disperse its aircraft more deeply. It can move some launch points farther back. It can change altitudes, routes, and escort patterns. It can intensify pressure on radar networks and command links. It can also try to flood the battle space with drones, forcing defenders to spend attention and munitions in several directions at once. So no, the Gripen is not a magic sword. It is something more realistic and, in some ways, more important. It is a tool that can make Russian air operations less comfortable, less cheap, less predictable, and less safe. In long wars, that matters enormously. People often misunderstand what turns a war. They look for one massive event, one cinematic breakthrough, one headline that declares everything different overnight. But real change often comes through accumulation. One weapon system raises the cost a little, another improves survival a little, another helps logistics a little, another complicates enemy planning a little, and then one day the side that once acted with confidence suddenly acts with hesitation. That hesitation is priceless, because hesitation can save cities, hesitation can save trenches, hesitation can save lives. And if you want to understand why the title says total panic, this is the answer. The panic is not about a shiny Swedish jet appearing like a movie hero. The panic is about what that jet represents. It represents the possible end of easy bombing runs. It represents the collapse of routine. It represents a future where Russian crews can no longer assume distance equals safety. It represents an enemy learning how to survive, hide, launch, strike, and vanish under conditions built for exactly this kind of pressure. That is a planner's nightmare, because once your enemy proves it can operate in dispersed, resilient, and deadly ways, your old targeting logic loses value. You cannot simply hit one base and declare success. You cannot assume every cratered runway keeps fighters down. You cannot count on the same launch corridor staying safe. You cannot rely on the same pattern of fear below. And remember something else. War is not only metal and maps, it is adaptation speed. The side that learns faster often survives longer. In that contest, the Gripen is not just useful because of its radar, missile options, or runway flexibility. It is useful because it rewards fast adaptation. It is a jet made for responsive warfare. Hide, refuel, rearm, launch again, change position, keep the enemy guessing. Against a larger force, that style is incredibly valuable. So will the Gripen win the war by itself? No? Anyone telling you that is selling emotion instead of analysis. But can it help change the air equation in ways that matter far beyond its numbers? Absolutely. Can it threaten strike aircraft that once felt safe? Yes. Can it force Russia to spend more resources, accept more risk, and rethink mission planning? Yes. Can it offer Ukraine a fighter that fits the hard reality of dispersed survival instead of peacetime comfort? Yes. And when you put all of that together, you begin to understand why the reaction in Moscow would be so intense. Because large militaries do not only fear stronger enemies, they fear smarter equations. They fear systems that take away cheap advantages. They fear opponents that stop playing by the target list they prepared. They fear weapons that do not need perfect conditions to remain dangerous. Most of all, they fear the moment when a war that felt manageable starts becoming expensive in new ways. That is the real story here. Not a miracle, not a fantasy. A shift in cost, a shift in risk, a shift in who gets to feel safe above the battlefield. And if that shift becomes real, even in limited sectors, then the message to Russia is brutal. The old freedom in the sky is over. The old shortcuts are dying, and every future strike may carry a question that has haunted air forces for generations. What if this time we do not make it home? That is why the Gripen matters. That is why the title matters. And that is why in wars like this, panic is rarely caused by one machine. It is caused by the first clear sign that the rules are changing. Script data. What happens when a fighter jet built for icy back roads and fast ambushes suddenly becomes the nightmare of a much bigger air force? What if the real reason for panic in Moscow is not the plane itself, but the safe sky Russia may be about to lose? If you enjoy sharp military breakdowns in plain English, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with the one friend who always wants the deeper story before everyone else. For a long time, Russia enjoyed a brutal kind of comfort above the battlefield. Its strike aircraft could rise, release guided bombs from a distance, and turn away before many Ukrainian defenses could touch them. That advantage was not just about speed, it was about confidence. Russian crews could plan missions with the feeling that the most dangerous part of the trip might never come. And when one side begins to feel safe in war, that side becomes more aggressive, more efficient, and more willing to repeat the same attack again and again. That is why the talk around the JS-39 Gripen matters so much. Not because it is the biggest fighter in Europe, not because it is the most famous, and not because a few jets suddenly end a war. The reason is more dangerous than that. The Gripen attacks a weakness in the Russian method itself. It goes after the habit Russia built in the air. It goes after the rhythm. It goes after the assumption that strike aircraft can keep operating with low risk while ground troops and cities below absorb the damage. And that is where the fear begins, because the Gripen was not designed for comfort. It was designed for survival. Sweden built it with one dark idea in mind. If a stronger enemy smashes the main air bases first, the Air Force must still fight. That means a jet that can land on roads, launch from short stretches of pavement, refuel quickly, rearm quickly, and disappear before the next missile arrives. It means a fighter that does not need a giant exposed base to remain useful. It means a system made for a nation that expects to be hunted. Now put that idea into Ukraine. Suddenly, the conversation changes from how many jets are delivered to how hard they are to kill. That is a massive difference. Many aircraft can look impressive in brochures and air shows. War does not care about brochures. War asks much uglier questions. Can this jet fly after the runway is cratered? Can the crew service it with limited tools? Can it hide? Can it return fast enough to matter tomorrow and the next day and the day after that? Can it keep working when everything around it is damaged, rushed, and under threat?